The purpose of this video is to show you how to create an intervention using the Tier 3 ELA interventions that are available within Student Analytics and Insights, formerly known as Unified Insights. We will be using a training server for this video. There are no real students or real data shown. Any likeness to any real student is purely coincidental. The first thing I'm going to do within Student Analytics and Insights is navigate over to my utility apps and my MTSS interventions. So I'm going to click on Utility Apps, MTSS Interventions. This is going to populate my MTSS Interventions page. The first page that loads is the All Interventions tab. This is only going to show active interventions that you have been added as a staff member to. So it's perfectly normal that this page might be empty for you right now until you begin interventions. To start an intervention, you're going to come over to the intervention bank. In order to find what you're looking for, you can use the filters or the search bar. I'm going to use the filters and I'm going to apply an intervention level of Tier 3. And then I'm going to apply a intervention type of ELA K-3. And then I'll be presented with all of the Tier 3 ELA K-3 interventions that are available. In this training server, I have replicated one for us to use for this video. And I'm going to use this Spire. When I'm ready to use the plan, I'm going to click on Use this plan. I'm going to go through the tabs at the bottom here to create my intervention. The first thing I'm going to do is add students. I do have to add at least one student in order to start the intervention. In order to add students, I'm just going to search for their names, click on the student I need, and then click Add Student. I'm going to repeat this process a few times and add some students to our intervention so that we can take a look at how it works. So I've added 4 students to my intervention. You can repeat that process and add as many as needed. The next thing I'm going to do is come to my Staff tab. I will need to add staff members that I need to be able to view and enter data within this intervention. So if I am an intervention teacher or a reading coach and I need to add in the student's classroom teacher, some of my fellow colleagues at the school level, or some of my colleagues at the district level, I'll do the same process and search for staff members here. You'll see your name if you are the one creating. Since I'm in a training server, I just see this admin, but you'll see your real name and then you'll search by staff members here. If you do not see a staff member's name populate, that means they have never logged into Unified Insights. So you'll need to reach out to them and ask them to do that so that you can add them to the intervention. So you'll search and then click on their name and then click Add Staff. The next thing you're going to do is choose a schedule. For these K-3 ELA interventions, what you're going to do is choose the end date as the school year end date. So I'm going to choose my start date and I'm going to go to August, and my first day of school was August 7th, and I'm going to choose my end date and go all the way to May and select my last day of school in May. Once I have completed these first 3 tabs, I'm going to skip over this student support resources and I'm going to come down here and click Start Intervention. My intervention is going to pull up. I'll get the notification that it successfully started. And now I can start entering in data. I'll see the name of my intervention. I'll see the option to delete the intervention before I've entered in any data if I accidentally use the wrong one. I have my Manage Intervention. If I later need to add in students, I can do that at any point. I can also add in staff members at any point. By coming back here to the Manage Intervention, It brings up the same page we were just on with the tabs, and now I'm going to add in another student that I left off. Or maybe it is Christmas and we just had a new student enroll and I need to add them to the intervention. I can add students at any time. We're also going to talk about how I can remove students at any time if needed. And then I can also add in any additional staff members. I've made some changes, so I'm going to save and close, and it's going to pull that intervention page back up for me. I've got my schedule here. I can see the number of enrolled students and the assigned staff. We skipped that student support resources, so I don't see anything there, and I shouldn't expect to. The next area is my meeting completion. This is going to tell me how far in my date range am I from completion. So I'm 10% of the way from August 7th, 2024 to May 22nd, 2025. Then I have other dashboards for attendance and observations that will populate as I enter in data. I can also add in intervention notes here. So if I go to my intervention notes, I'm going to click add a new note. This is a sample note here. I can put in a link if I needed to. I can choose whether or not this note is public and all of the staff members that I've added to this intervention can see it. Or if it's private, that means only I can see it. And then I can also link it to a student. So if this is just for James, I can choose to link it to James. And I'm going to save this note. And now I can have running commentary with my colleagues that are working with this intervention and entering data, because I can also reply to this note. And other individuals can reply as well because it's a public note. So all of my notes would be listed here. I'm going to click my arrow and go back to my intervention page. So any notes that are added are going to be in this area. Then we're going to come down to where we actually enter the data for this intervention. It's very important to understand that everything with the intervention is date driven. All of the data that we enter is attached to that date that we enter it for. If I go to another date, I have a blank slate to be able to now enter data for a new date. So what I'm going to do first of all is I'm going to select the date that I want to begin entering data for. So I'm going to go all the way back to my first day of school, August 7th. Now, a lot of you are probably wondering, do I need to delete days that I'm not meeting with my intervention here? And for these, the guidance is that no, you do not have to. You do not have to delete any of the days where you're not meeting. You just will not enter data for those. So I've selected Wednesday, August 7th. So that means I'm entering in data for Wednesday, August 7th. The next thing I can see here are my student overview cards. This is going to give me data as I start to populate information in for my students. The first thing that is required is attendance. So I'm going to navigate to the attendance tab. Attendance is required. Time attended is not. I can mark attendance individually for students just by clicking, or I also have a bulk option. So if I select all of my students and click on bulk options, I can set their attendance all at once. So maybe everyone was present except for Andrew. So I'm just going to go back and mark Andrew by himself because it makes it a little easier that way. Now, I have entered in attendance. That is only for Wednesday, August 7th. Now I'm going to go over to observations. It is recommended that observations be documented. In order to document observations, I can do the same thing. I can click on the observations individually, or I can select all of my students and use my bulk options and set observations. So all of my students were fully engaged, except for Andrew, who was not there, so I'm going to remove that observation from him. My next tab is my goals. this is where I'll need to put in goal data as I am progress monitoring. So I'm going to notice here that I have a goal because I'm using Spire. I have concept assessment listed here. The score type is numeric and the target is 80. Then I have a field where I can put in a target score as I progress monitor. Just like with attendance and observations, this is only for Wednesday, August 7th. So I'm going to put in some sample numbers here as some possible scores that my students might have gotten. And it is saving as I go. So all of that information was just for Wednesday, August 7th. If I go back to my student overview, I'll see that data is starting to populate in my cards now. If I have August 7th selected, I'll be able to see the attendance I marked, the observations I marked, and the goal data I entered. What I'm going to do now is I want you to pay attention where I have attendance marked, and I am now going to move to my next day, which is August 8th. I now have a blank slate. I can mark attendance on this date for these students. I can mark observations on this date for the students. And I can also enter in new goal data. So I'm going to put in some more information here. And it is going to calculate my students' change and growth as I go. And then when I move to my next day, I now have a new blank slate. But I don't want you to think that means that the data is gone. If I go back to Thursday, there's the goal data, observations, and attendance I marked for Thursday. And then if I go to Wednesday, August 7th, here's the data I marked for Wednesday. Now that I have a few days of data in, I'm going to see even more on my students' cards, including this great line graph that's going to show me their progress towards the target. Now, because my intervention does last until the end of the school year, that may mean that students are completing before other students. They may have a change in status. And I also, like I said earlier, may need to add new students as they come in. In order to do that, we'll say it is October or November, and now we have a new student that we need to add, and we also have a student that, according to our information, is no longer needing this intervention. So I'm going to click on Manage Intervention. And on my student tab, I'm going to find the student that is no longer needing the intervention. And I'm going to give them a new status. I can choose to complete them. I have a few options here. Or I can choose to withdraw them. So we're going to say that this student is complete, met intervention goal. And then I'm also going to add in a new student that just enrolled with me a few days ago. And I'm going to save and close. So I successfully updated the intervention. Now, when I go down to my student's overview, you'll notice that my student that I completed is not at the top anymore. So I can sort students by student status if I want to. I can search for students. If I search by student status, here is the student that I completed, and now they're at the end. That means I'm not going to enter in data for them anymore. So if I try to go do attendance, that student is still here, but notice their attendance is grayed out because they've been completed or withdrawn. So as you're going throughout the year, you can add students, and you also can complete students that may be finished, but my other students are still working and still receiving the intervention. One final thing I want to show you is that you can print reports for your students. In their card on these three dots, you're going to click on that and then click Print Report. You can choose what you want to print, and let me actually print for James because he's the one I put the note in for. So I'm going to click on Print Report for James. And then I can choose to include which goals. If you have multiple goals in your intervention, you can choose to only print the ones you need. You can choose to include notes if there are any. And then you can choose to print just dates with data or all meeting dates. So I'm going to pull this up, and you have a really nice colorful chart that gives you a great overview of what the student has been doing in the intervention, including the goal progress and the intervention notes. Hopefully this information helps you go through and enter in the data according to the guidance that has been provided.